Okay, so like I said, I do have some psychology for us today because I think the biggest environmental crime is the people in power doing absolutely nothing to slow or stop climate change.
Hard agree.
I wanted to learn a little bit more about the science behind climate change denial.
Okay.
Or
I
as
love this.
Or as the Australian Psychological Society puts it, quote, how do we solve the "it's not my problem" problem? Because it's really what it boils down to.
Oh, yeah.
Also, this episode is airing after the election. So since I am speaking into the future, I really, really, really hope that we're in a good place.
That we're at least sustaining and not under the orange thumb of the fascist.
I think I told you I had a nightmare that Donald Trump won and then I was being chased with a flamethrower.
You did.
As long as I conveyed that to you.
Yep, you did. I feel your fear.
Okay, thank you. I just want to be seen.
I see you, baby.
So first of all, there are two kind of flavors of climate change denial.
Okay.
So the first is if an individual just straight up does not think it's happening at all.
Yeah, just doesn't believe it.
And the second is like the soft denial is an individual kind of thinking / knowing that it's real, but not doing anything to act on it.
Yeah. I'll be dead before it's really a problem for me, so why vote?
Why have kids?
Yeah.
If you're not going to vote, if you're not going to do anything to recycle or like do anything, please don't have kids.
Yeah.
Also, this shit's going to impact us in our lifetime. It's
it
not
already
just about
is.
Future generations. It's
Look at
right now.
What was it? Helene and Milton?
Yeah.
Back to back.
And
hurricanes.
there are still people like, well, it's hurricane season.
I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, we're here, baby.
California's on fire every year. Maui burned all the way across the fucking island. Y'all, it's happening.
So another way to think about these two different types of denial are explicit denial versus implicit.
Okay.
So this is from the National Center for Science Education. I spelled education wrong. Oh my God. Education.
Don't admit that.
It's too embarrassing not to admit.
Like, girl,
Okay.
Don't admit that. I'm trying to help you here.
Okay, quote, climate change denial is most conspicuous when it is explicit. So like, I don't believe in climate change. As it is in controversies over climate education. So like if a school is teaching climate change now.
Yeah. That's fake news.
The idea of implicit denial, however, is increasingly discussed among those who study the controversies over climate change. So implicit denial occurs when people who accept the scientific community's consensus, which by the way is 97%, on the answers to the central questions of climate change on the intellectual level, fail to come to terms with it or to translate their acceptance into action. So this would be, people who are in denial, so to speak, about climate change because they're not doing anything about it, but also like, well, we'll get to it, but one example would be like, what difference am I going to make on my own individual small level?
Right. Which, to some degree, I do understand because there's so much propaganda about like passing the buck of the responsibility of lowering your carbon footprint, recycling, doing all of these things that as an individual consumer are good for the environment, while what's the stat? There's like 7 global corporations that are actually responsible for like 85% of, climate impact.
Oh,
it's like a yes and.
It's definitely a yes and. But I think that I think that people are very much inclined, which I will get to explaining, very much inclined to not make changes, to not accept that this is a real problem, and also in the same vein to not accept that they can contribute to some kind of solution.
Yep.
Because it's easier and less scary to not go there.
Yeah, totally.
And because this isn't a thing where it's like, oh, there's going to be 8 tornadoes in your area tomorrow if you don't act on this today.
Yeah, the consequence is not immediate. Mm-hmm.
It's also completely unpredictable. You might never see another tornado in your lifetime. That's unpredictable. Mm-hmm. But also, 8 tornadoes could tear through your town tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, North Minneapolis is still recovering from a tornado that came through the city in like, when was that? 2015, 2016? It's almost 10 years ago.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So back to this like implicit versus explicit, one could view bipartisan politics as Republicans being explicit deniers, no, it doesn't exist. The climate fluctuates every 3,000 years, whatever the fuck their talking points are. And also Democrats who are implicit deniers by admitting that it's a thing and we have to make a change, but we're going to keep drilling in the Arctic. Yeah. We're going to keep expanding coal mining.
We're going to
Because the economy is the number one. If we don't have economic growth, it's bad.
Yeah.
Like
we'll never be able to fix the problem.
We have to keep growing at all costs. Yeah. So this quote is from a study from nature.com. Quote, we estimate that 14.8% of Americans do not believe in climate change. So these would be explicit deniers. This denialism is highest in the central and southern United States. However, it also persists in clusters within certain states, for example, California, where belief in climate change is otherwise pretty high. Political affiliation has the strongest correlation of who does or does not believe, quote unquote, in climate change, followed by level of education, COVID-19 vaccination rates.
That correlation makes a lot of sense, actually.
Carbon intensity of the regional economy. So, like, if your whole economy is dependent on coal,
then you're going to fight to keep your job.
You're not going to admit that climate change exists because that's your whole livelihood, which I understand.
Yeah, it's deeply troubling, and I get it. That's one of the fucking many adverse effects of capitalism. We can't survive unless we are producing something and making money.
And growing the economy.
Then it's not in your immediate best interest to, buck your own industry that's fucking keeping food on you and your family's table. It's insidious.
The last factor is income, which I think kind of relates to a couple of those previous factors. Renowned environmental psychologist Robert Gifford has identified 33 barriers to climate action, which he calls, in the most badass fashion, the Dragons of Inaction.
Ooh, I like that.
So there's 33 dragons. And these are behavioral, cognitive things, psychological things that prevent any given person from taking pro-environmental action. So the first one is limited cognition. So this is simply if they don't have the information or if they have inaccurate information or if they get their news exclusively from Fox and Facebook.
Yeah.
This would also include people who don't think, like I said, that they can make a difference on their own and contribute to positive change without like, oh, well, there are 7 corporations that contribute to that, which I'm not like mocking or anything, but like people are like, well, this has to happen on a legislative corporate level for it to make any kind of a difference.
Which is true, but that won't happen unless we as the consumers push for that to happen. So we still have to take action.
It's my opinion that it's going to be a domino effect, and we have to vote with our dollars. That's the only thing that's going to have an effect.
Literally.
It's strictly greed and money. That's what it's about, period. And if our solutions don't have a way of generating profit, it's not going to happen.
Not in the current system, that's for sure.
Second dragon, ideological worldviews. So these are preconceived ideas such as the belief that God is in charge. Or
let go and let God. Jesus take the wheel.
Book of Revelation, there's going to be floods and fires. And oh, look, there's floods and there's fires. Jesus is coming. It's a good thing. Also, people who believe in free enterprise capitalism or that the future technologies are going to solve this problem. Like, oh, it's in the hands of the next generation.
They'll figure it out.
This would also include the don't tread on me camp. Also, I think conspiracy theories would go here too. This is ideology stuff.
Yeah.
And sure. That is associated with like the collective narcissism of certain groups that are like, we've been wronged by this other group. You know, it's not fair. Whatever. Like these rules don't apply to us.
Sure.
It's my freedoms.
Yeah.
Don't take away my freedoms. I don't want to drive a smart car.
Yeah. Fuck you.
Yeah. Okay, then we have social comparison. So these are people who people in general will adopt the behaviors of others around them that they admire, like so-called influencers. And these behaviors include energy consumption. So if everyone in your neighborhood is getting solar panels and making a big deal about turning your lights off when you're not home and setting your thermostat to like a smart, like, oh, we're out of town, we don't need it at this time, you know, things like that, then you would be more likely to participate in those behaviors as well.
Yeah, it almost becomes like a social cultural practice because like your community is engaging in these practices together and influencing each other in this direction.
And it works the other way around, too, because if a person believes that no one else around them is making any pro-environmental changes, then they won't either because that's not fair. Why am I responsible for making up for all of your shit? Donald Trump is often cited as the biggest influencer when it comes to climate change denial because Trump doesn't think it's real, so it's not real. And then another example that I read in this article, the Ford F-150 continues to be America's best-selling vehicle despite having terrible gas mileage. That's just the dudes in their big trucks. This is the dudes in their big trucks category.
Yeah.
Next, we have sunk costs and momentum. So this is when people see their investments, which doesn't necessarily only apply to financial investments. It can be just like time, emotion, whatever. But it's investments that a person has made that they don't want to sacrifice. So for example, owning a car. I want to own a car because I
worked hard for this car.
I also don't have time to utilize public transportation. If I want to go to Target, I want to go to Target right now. I'm not waiting for a bus. I'm not figuring out my connections. I'm not going to haul everything back in a bus. Same with like composting. If your city or a municipality doesn't have like a composting
bin system,
I don't even know what it's called because I don't compost, then you're not going to compost. Also, habits such as like your diet, if you're vegan or vegetarian, this falls into this category. Additionally, how you feel about where you live. And this is a psychology component known as place attachment. So if you love your home, if you love your community, you love your neighborhood where you live, that's going to impact your behavior. I'm going to go around the block and pick up litter.
Yep. I'm going to support it. I'm going to invest in it.
I'm going to vote.
I'm going to care for it.
I'm going to vote for the politicians who want to improve the drainage situation in the park up the hill. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's your place attachment. I think this was a big one. Disbelief in experts and authorities. So this is very self-explanatory. Like I said, despite a 97% scientific consensus that humans are causing the climate crisis, a large portion of the populace does not trust, quote unquote, them, scientists, anyone in charge. This is a major problem.
Yeah.
So here's a little quote from the New Yorker, quote, even in a stable constitutional republic, a cynical or unmoored citizenry presents an opportunity for demagogues and populists. Sound familiar? As much as stagnant wages in former manufacturing regions, so like coal country, glaring economic inequality, or white backlash after the Obama presidency, the country's disillusionment with institutions enabled Donald Trump's election. Again, connect the dots, people.
Yep.
All of this is intertwined. By the way, Trump's administration significantly diminished regulations and policies concerning the environment to the point where it's going to be really, really hard to gain that ground back.
Yeah.
He did a lot of damage.
Yeah, we mentioned
really flew under the radar.
We mentioned the Chevron decision in the lead crimes episode, but it's obviously also incredibly pertinent to this conversation.
Last, I think this is the last. Nope, second to last dragon. We have our perceived risks of change. So this is when you question, like, are my changes going to pay off in the long run? Is going vegan really going to make that much of a difference? Or am I just losing out on, like, the life satisfaction and joy of butter for the rest of my life, and it's not really going to make a difference?
I'm sorry. I will sentence the world to death before I will give up cheese. Like, I'm just being honest.
You have a lot of options in terms of your particular actions. There's a lot of things you could do, and there are a lot more people.
Vegan's not the only way.
No, thank God.
It is a way. And
it's a very important way. I think going vegan is actually extraordinarily beneficial.
And it's radical.
Do I have the bravery to do that yet? No.
I have a lot of respect for people who do it. And, you know, there are certainly people who do it because their bodies literally, like, can't process the foods that I shove into my gullet every fucking day. But, like, people who do make that decision to make a environmental or political impact, I commend you, and I will default to other methods. I'm already diabetic. There's so much in my food life that I have to fucking deal with. I've got enough on my plate.
Yeah.
Figuratively and literally.
I'm not a vegan, and I don't really have any real excuse not to be, but I'm just not there yet. I'm not there right now. I'm not going to say yet because that implies a promise, and I'm not promising anything. We're also about to go to Italy, for fuck's sake. I'm not putting any dietary restrictions on myself. We're also flying to Italy. Air travel is a big one.
It really is.
Okay. Moving away from how bad we are. There's also the factors of psychological distance. So, like, you could attribute this to cognitive dissonance, but also be like, I have enough to deal with today. Making these changes is not an immediate concern. I'm just going to kick that can down the road. That's psychological distance. Spatial distance. Spatial distance would be me in Iowa, you in Minnesota. We're not going to get flooded anytime soon. People underestimate the risk of natural disasters in their community because our brains weigh experience a lot more than, like, analysis or statistics. So if something's never happened to you, you just assume that it never will happen to you. And that's not to say that hypothetically, like you were just talking about tornadoes in North Minneapolis. Hypothetically, of course, a tornado could rip down your street. But, like, you don't really think that might happen. And
I
even
mean,
if you
none
did
of us
think
really-
it might happen, you're not just going to be like, I'm going to start recycling today to prevent this.
Yeah, none of us really thought that the cities at St. Paul, Minneapolis were all that in danger of tornado activity because the areas surrounding us in the not too far suburbs have much more conducive conditions for tornado activity. And yet it is happening. And you're right. Even in a community as small as Minneapolis, I live on the South Side. There's certainly a dissonance there as well. Like, well, yeah, that happened on the North Side. That's not going to happen here.
Isn't that terrible? It happened 5 miles away.
Yeah, if that. I mean, it's like, y'all, this city is small as fuck. And this is an interesting concept because we in the Midwest, I think, are very guilty of this kind of cognitive dissonance because we're not coastal. And so we don't have the same weather patterns as, say, hurricane areas like in the Gulf or in Florida or up the East Coast. We also weren't seeing as many forest fires, impacts of drought, things like that were happening, say, in California. But like every year, I mean, Minnesotans are definitely feeling it. Every summer is drier and drier. There are like lake waters that are drying up. You can see like Midwest desert-like conditions developing right now in our state. And lots of people are looking at cities like Des Moines, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Detroit, these like beautiful Midwestern cities that are right on the Great Lakes as like climate oases where it's like, okay, it's not too hot and they get good rainfall and there's access to clean water and we're not going to deal with hurricanes and there aren't as many forest fires. It's like, okay, sure, for now. But then as the populations explode because of climate refugees, which is a very fucking real thing, then all of these other climate impacts are just going to start developing in those areas as they're overpopulated. So it's just a fucking snake eating its own tail. You can't just move from a hurricane zone to what for now is a safer or more stable climate area, say in the United States, and expect it to expect that to be the only thing you need to do to avoid the climate crisis, and that it's fine. It's like, no.
I heard someone on NPR a couple weeks ago. I forgot what the segment was, but she was being interviewed and she said that she and her family decided to move from, it was either California or like Idaho, but basically somewhere where there was a bunch of like wildfires. And she's like, it's only a matter of time before we lose everything. So we're going to move. So like a year ago, they moved to Asheville
and,
to escape climate related disasters. And then look at what happened to Asheville a few weeks ago.
Well, and to the point of how climate change is changing what we have grown to understand about like what areas are affected by certain climate disasters. These hurricanes came farther inland than I think any that we've ever seen in the United States.
It's unbelievable.
Well, I sure hope you liked that clip. If you did like that clip, make sure you are subscribing to our YouTube channel, leaving us a nice review, and joining us on Patreon for even more video content, audio content, salacious content all around. Come join us. Treat yourself.